Today we are going to discuss purchase invoice processing. Purchase invoices differ from your purchase orders in the sense that when you post a purchase invoice, you are simply posting either the receipt of the items and the actual showing the allocation of that invoice all at once, or just showing the allocation of the invoice, meaning that I've got the invoice from the vendor for, let's say, maybe a telephone bill, and I want to go ahead and just allocate that in the system, show that I've received that so I can turn around and pay it. Now, with a purchase order, you actually receive your items separately, then you create the invoice with it. So there's a two-step process with that. So let's take a look at how it works with a purchase invoice. If I go out to the purchase button and go to order processing, I can choose invoices from here. This will bring us out to the last invoice that we happen to be working on, or in our particular case, since we haven't been working on one, to an untitled purchase invoice. What we're going to do is first press enter. What that'll do is it'll grab the next invoice number in succession for us to start working with. Once I grab that number, you'll notice here we've got invoice number 252. It also defaulted in our posting date and document date to be the work date, 12/1/04. Now the significance of these two fields is that the posting date is the date that this transaction will hit our general ledger, and the document date is the date, or it should be the date, of the actual vendor's invoice that you've received. So this will drive your payment terms. So we're going to go through a couple different examples. The first example will just be us posting, let's say, a charge from EXO Communications for our internet service for the month. So let's go out here to our Buy From Vendor Number field, click on our lookup arrow, and what we're going to do is we've got Nissan Forklift Corporation is the current one that we're on, but what we actually want is EXO Communications. So we're going to go find EXO Communications like I've done here, and we're going to pick EXO as our company to go ahead and work with. Now I'm going to enter through, and this will bring me down to my vendor invoice number field. What I'm going to do is I'm going to capture what that vendor invoice number was on the invoice that I received in the mail from them. That way it keeps in sync the vendor's invoice number here with our invoice number. If we ever needed to look at this posted document later to reference their invoice number, we have that field captured. And it also will show this vendor invoice number on the check stub when we go ahead and send the check off to the vendor. So it shows which particular invoice we happen to be paying. Here in the order address code field, I can go ahead and click on the lookup arrow and pick from a different order address to order from. In our case, this vendor only has one address, which happens to be the New York address here, so we're just going to use that. In the purchaser code field, I can go ahead and capture who the purchaser is that went ahead and purchased this. So if I wanted to put the person's name in here, if it was me working with it, I can go ahead and capture that. In the Responsibility Center field, if you're using Responsibility Centers, you could choose to capture the Responsibility Center for this, and that'll default information in, such as the location code through which this is for, as well as any default dimensions that we've assigned to that Responsibility Center. I'm going to enter through and go to the Invoicing tab, and here it shows the Pay To Vendor Number field. This Pay To Vendor Number for this particular vendor happens to be the same as the actual vendor EXO Communications, because on the vendor card we have not assigned a different Pay To vendor to pay our invoices to. So we're going to pay them all to New York, this New York office of EXO Communications. Scrolling down through the list, of course, it brings the name, address, city, state, zip, all that information in. If the vendor was a 1099 vendor and you had a 1099 code assigned to that vendor, it would default it in here. We're going to go through an example of a 1099 vendor in a couple minutes. Now here we've got our department code and project code, which happen to be two dimensions, the two global dimensions in this sample company. And here we've it defaulted in the Hartford department code from that Responsibility Center. The payment terms code. It defaulted in from the vendor card, net 30 for this particular vendor. It shows that the due date of this invoice is 12/31/04. Well, let's just say, as an example, that when we looked at this, on the posting date here, we could leave it as 12/1 because that's the day we're posting it in our system. But the document date that was actually on the vendor's invoice was 11/27. So they sent it to us a couple of days ago. We didn't get it till today. You always want to make sure that you enter in whatever the document date is of the vendor's. You want to enter into the document date field whatever the vendor's invoice date is, because that is what's going to drive our due date calculation here. So now you'll notice it shows it's due on 12/27/04 instead of 12/31. And the reason we do that is because the vendor is going to calculate your terms of net 30 from the date of their invoice, not the date that you receive it. So you want to capture that information such that when you go ahead and make your payables run in your payment journal, this will get pulled in at the proper time. If you had a payment discount percentage applied from your payment terms code, such as in here we've got 2% 10 net 30, it would certainly bring that information in here, the 2%, and then what the payment discount date was to receive that 2% discount. Here you have an on hold field, which can be used. It's an information field that you can use to enter in information for this as to why something might be on hold. And then you have this tax liability information. We are not going to fill out this tax liability information. We're going to go through another example where we talk about use tax, and we'll look at those fields then. Moving over to the shipping tab, the location code of Hartford got brought in from our responsibility center, and it defaulted in our ship to name address where this particular invoice was sent to. So it was sent to our 40 Darling Drive. If you were receiving inventory items, this would be the location that you would receive them in on. You can also capture the shipment method code. If I click on the lookup arrow, it shows the type of shipment method from this vendor. Because this is a service that they provided, they just sent us a bill, we're not going to enter in a shipment method. Foreign trade and e-commerce are advanced topics that are not covered in our basic training series, so we're not going to go into those tabs. Back to the general tab here. Now that we've filled out all the information on the header, we can start filling out line information. Now it's of utmost importance that you fill out your header as completely as possible first before filling out your lines, which are down here, because of the fact that the lines will default in information from the header. So it'll take information from the header and it'll get copied down to these lines. So, for this particular example, let's choose GL account. We just want to show that we have this internet expense. We're going to choose GL account 64700, which is part of our office expenses. And we're going to show a quantity here of 1. And the total unit cost of this, or the total cost of the invoice that came in, let's say came in at $395 for that internet expense. So here now we've shown the cost of $395. What we could do at this point is we can start, or we can do a test report to see if this will post properly. If we go to the posting button and choose test report, this now will show us, based on our options that we've chosen here for the order posting, we said we want to receive and ship as well as test invoicing. When we choose preview, it shows us if there's going to be any errors that are going to occur. And you'll notice that we have no warnings or errors that show up here, so it looks like everything should post just fine for us. So let's close out of that. And what happens is now we can go ahead and post this. We go to the posting button, we choose post, and we say yes to posting the invoice, and this will create a ledger entry to XO Communications, an open ledger entry, so that we have to go ahead and pay them. If I go out to vendors and I choose XO Communications and drill down into the balance field, now you'll notice that when we posted that on 12/1, right, invoice number 252, it shows for $395 and it is currently still open. So that'll show up in our open ledger entries when we go ahead and pull into our payment journal those particular entries that we should pay. Okay, our next example that I want to go through, that example was a typical example. It's usually a telephone bill that comes in or some sort of thing where we're actually not getting tangible goods, we're just getting a bill for services provided or something like that, that we go ahead and post that. In this next example, I want to go in and I want to create an invoice from, let's say, Nissan Forklift Corporation for an inventory item that we're going to happen to be using in-house. Okay, this is going to be for something that we're going to use in stock here, but yet the vendor doesn't collect sales tax from us. So what we are liable for is use tax. Use tax in this situation would be we bring it in, we use it in-house, we have to pay for the use of that particular item. Use tax is also utilized for something where if I purchase something out of state for this and the state requires me to go ahead and report use tax, if I don't pay tax to that, then we're going to want to capture that here on this invoice. So we do that by going through, and we'll go through the same process. We'll create the invoice, and we're just going to grab, let's say, Nissan Forklift Corporation as our vendor. Okay, I'm going to enter through, and here on the vendor invoice number field, we're going to enter in the vendor's invoice number. I'm going to quickly go through, pick Hartford Responsibility Center. I'm going to enter through. On the invoicing tab now, here we're going to go through and enter in information for tax liable information. Because we are responsible for the use tax, we need to define which tax area code to use for the system to go look into our sales tax setup matrix to determine the tax rate to charge. So we're going to choose that we are tax liable for this, and the tax area code we're going to use is the out-of-state tax area code for use tax. So we'll say OK to that. Okay, now that we've got that information in here, just in reviewing over this, the shipping tab, everything looks okay for this. And what we're going to do is we're going to choose an item that we're going to purchase from this vendor. So let's say that we're purchasing a tie rod assembly from them, and we've got a quantity of 2 on this particular case. So here now, in our tax group code, which defaulted in from the item, because this is a tax group code that we assign to the item that would typically go to our when we sell this to customers and so forth, we're going to actually change this for this line to purchased goods for use tax. Okay, so we change that to the purchased goods, and then we're going to specify here by checking the box, hitting the space bar or simply checking it with your mouse, that this is use tax. Now what happens with this is that the system is going to go through, and it's actually going to calculate whatever tax rate we've defined in our matrix, which in this particular case is 6%. It's going to calculate that tax, but it's only going to post the total amount of $14 to the vendor card. So let's go out here, and then when we run the report at the end of the month, our sales taxes collected report, we could choose to include use tax, and it'll capture all that information as to how much tax we're supposed to pay. So now we go down to our posting button. We can go to the test report button and choose preview and see if there's going to be any errors. And you'll notice here that there are no errors, there are no warnings for this. And you'll notice though here that it shows our tax area code of out-of-state use tax for a total of the tax percentage is 6% and the total tax base amount is $14. So our tax amount was going to end up being $84. I'm sorry, 84 cents. But when we take a look at the vendor, you'll see that this actually just posts the $14 to them. So let's close out of this. And now let's go ahead and post this invoice to Nissan Forklift. We'll say yes to posting the invoice because we had no problems with that. And now let's take a look at the vendor card for Nissan. And if we go out to Nissan's ledger entries by drilling into the balance field and scroll down to the end of the list here, or as of 12/1, you'll notice that we had invoice number 253, right, on 12/1 of 04, and it actually shows here the total invoice amount is only $14. We've captured that tax elsewhere, but it is only $14, so we only have to pay $14 to the vendor, so that'll get pulled in properly. It doesn't calculate it as sales tax. If we navigate on the entries that got created during this, it'll show us here that we had this posted purchase invoice. It shows the 5GL entries, and then it also shows here a tax entry that was created for that 84 cents. Okay, now if you had selected on this particular invoice that it was not use tax, what the system would do is it would go through and look at your tax area code and tax liability information for that line and calculate it as sales tax. So it's very important that if it's going to be use tax, that you check off the box for use tax here on the line. Okay, the last example I want to go through is a purchase invoice for a 1099 vendor. So let's just go ahead and create an invoice here. And what we're going to do is we're going to choose Jim's Landscaping Service. So we choose Jim's Landscaping Service as our vendor. And Jim's Landscaping Service happens to be the vendor that we use to obviously take care of our landscaping at our building. So what we're going to do is capture his invoice number here, and we'll pull it in here, a responsibility center again of Hartford, let's say. We'll enter through, and now you'll notice that on the invoicing tab here we have this 1099 code of miscellaneous 07. Now, because that got brought in here, that's going to default the information onto our lines for us. So what we need to do is, in this particular case, we're not going to fill out any tax liability information or shipping. Looks good on that. We do want to show some columns though for this. And what we're going to show is, if we scroll down in this list, we have 1099 liable flag. Okay, let's just show this flag, and I'm going to open this up a little more so you can see this. And what we're going to do is we're going to show that Jim sent us a bill for some maintenance on the building. Okay, so we're going to choose a GL account, an occupancy cost expense account, maintenance of building and land, and we'll say that his quantity here was for $600 or something like that. Okay, so we put in a quantity of $600 in here. Now, for this particular example, on this purchase invoice, since it captured the 1099 code of miscellaneous 07, okay, you'll notice here that on the line it checked off the flag for 1099 liable. Now, if your vendor typically is a 1099 vendor, this is going to default that information in here for us automatically. But if the vendor happened to be billing you for something that isn't 1099 liable, you would simply come in here and uncheck that box. and then that would not capture that onto our 1099 statistics, so that at the end of the year that wouldn't be included in the total amount that we need to go ahead and send off to the IRS to report to them for how much we paid this particular 1099 vendor. So in this particular case now, we can go ahead and post this. Let's post it. Go to the posting button and choose post. Actually, before we do that, just to show you something on this vendor card, if I go to the vendor button and I choose 1099 statistics, right now it's showing $800 for 2004. So let's close back out of that real quick, and now let's post this. First we'll run a test report and preview that test report to make sure there's not going to be any errors, and it looks like there's no errors involved with this. So let's close out of that, and now let's go back to our posting button and post this. So now we've posted that invoice. Let's go out to the vendor card for Jim's landscaping service here, and if we go back down to the vendor button and look at 1099 statistics now, you'll notice that the 2004 amount is $800. Now the reason why it's still $800 is because we haven't actually paid this vendor for that particular invoice yet. So the system will not calculate that 2004 amount, or in this particular case the 1099 statistics, for how much we paid this vendor until we actually pay them in this particular case. So we paid them $800 for 1099 liable invoices. Until we pay that $600, it will not show up in the statistics. I wanted to show you that because we do capture the information, but until you actually pay it, it will not show up. So this concludes the video on purchase invoice processing.